the Australian research community for his imagination, optimism and vision. He is the publisher of the Barlow Report, a comprehensive and rigorous analysis of the Australian research system, and he is author of the central book about Australian innovation, The Australian Miracle. A gifted communicator, he also regularly appears in the media, is widely sought after as a public speaker about Australian innovation, technology, science, policy, and the future of knowledge. And Business Review Weekly has described him as an innovative visionary. The Australian has described him as an anarchist. His ideas are changing the way Australians think about science and technological innovation. Welcome, Dr. Thomas Barlow.
So I should walk straight out the door and say not another word, because I can only let myself down after that introduction. I'll try to make my remarks shorter than the introduction. Well, maybe not. I actually found after Alan's talk, I was feeling somewhat reassured on the subject of cyber security and cyber warfare. After John's talk, I'm absolutely terrorised. Thanks for that, John. Ladies and gentlemen, when our forebears long ago invented the spear and the wooden club, they no doubt improved their productivity as hunters. But they also made murder more efficient. When our predecessors devised the concept of money, they smoothed commercial transactions and trade and raised the prosperity of all. But they also took the first step towards the invention of the crime of stealing money. Humans are a fairly disagreeable species. And I don't say that, just out of some perverse self-deprecation or because I want to offend all of you. We are supremely inventive, and yet we are neither universally honest nor universally honourable. The fact is, the lesson from history is that if somebody invents a new technology that enables them to get one up over somebody else, it is inevitable that somebody will use it to that end. I cannot imagine an object of material value that somebody somewhere would not seek to steal if they believed they could get away with it. And the reality today is that we are living in the middle of an extraordinary technological revolution, one which is touching every aspect of human existence. It would be a denial of history and a denial of human nature if one felt that we could have just the benefits of this transformation and none of the threats. Now, we've heard in graphic detail from Alan about the threats. I guess even before anyone came to this room, we would all have been conscious of the escalation in electronic fraud. Everybody's read the stories of even our best technology companies like Google and LinkedIn falling prey to hackers, and of course governments throughout the developed world, and certainly our governments here in Australia, have become formally and officially exercised about the importance of cyber security and the real threat of cyber warfare. The incentives for the bad guys are obvious. A criminal in Budapest might seriously contemplate stealing this gentleman's money if he keeps it, as he does, as bits and bytes in a server somewhere. It's a lot more difficult for a criminal in Budapest to think about stealing the $20 bills that you have stored under your mattress. There's incentive, and as we've had in lurid detail, there's vulnerability. Our whole society is held together now by digital systems. Everything is interconnected, and it's not just interconnected in our own society, it's interconnected globally. So there are incentives and vulnerabilities, but to understand the risk, one also needs to appreciate the capabilities, both the capabilities of the attackers and the capabilities of the defenders. Now, one can think about this in very specific technical terms. One can think about it in the terms of the fellow who sits in his camper van and wreaks havoc on the other side of the world. But one can also think about capabilities in a more systemic and societal respect. And this is what I would like to do today. Because there's an underlying theme here. And I'd like to illustrate it in two respects. First off, we are in the midst of experiencing a collapse in technological dominance in the Western world in the computer sciences. 20 years ago, the United States was responsible for more than 50% of all computer science research publications published worldwide. It was responsible for more than 50% of all international patent applications relating to information and communications technologies. Today, the United States is responsible for just over 25% of global activity across both of those domains. In Australia, we account for less than 2% of global publications in computer science and for less than 1% of international patent applications in information and communications technologies. That represents a significant decline in capability relative to the rest of the world. And the growth has been global. Believe it or not, Middle Eastern nations and North African nations have increased their share of global publications in computer sciences, for instance, but coming off a low base. But most of the growth has occurred in Asia. Over the same 20-year period, Asian countries have increased their share of global computer science publications from 12% to 25%. Most of the increase has occurred in China. In the early 1990s, Chinese researchers accounted for less than 2% of global publications in computer science. They now account for 13% of global publications in computer science. Second only to the US. The Chinese have also experienced an extraordinary boom in patenting activity. In the early 1990s, the Chinese applied for less than 0.1% of patents in information and communications technologies. They now account for 11% of information and communications technologies patents. That is a higher proportion than any European country, with the exception of Germany. The three leading regions for innovation in information and communications technology now, commercially, globally, are still Silicon Valley, Tokyo, and Shenzhen in southern China. There are more patents in this space coming out of Shenzhen in southern China than there are coming out of France. The world is changing more quickly than most people imagine. The transformation may be positive for us. It reflects the growth of the economy in our region. It reflects a vibrancy, an intellectual vibrancy in our region. But it also suggests that the Western technological hegemony that has existed essentially since the discovery of the transistor no longer prevails. And this brings me to my second point. Because not only has the balance of intellectual power shifted away from the West, but even within Western countries, their own intellectual productivity has become increasingly dependent upon migrant populations from the emerging countries. One sees this very visibly with the US in its relationship with China. Following the Tiananmen Square massacre, the US granted permanent residency to 70,000 Chinese. Since that time, 60,000 Chinese have graduated with PhDs in US institutions. And even today, there are roughly 4,000 Chinese graduating every year with a PhD from US institutions, and the vast majority are still electing to remain in the US. That is a trend that has benefited the US commercially. It's a trend that has benefited the migrants themselves. But it has happened, in part, because we have had a generation of people in our societies who have neglected technical careers, who have chosen not to study technical subjects at university. They don't know what they've been doing. They've gone away on gap years, tried to discover themselves or save the world. Probably most of them are working for non-profit organisations. But the implication is that our technological capabilities in dealing with the cyber issue, in furthering our own economic interests, are not what they once were. And so, look, there's a lot that one can say. There's a lot that one could say to, terrorise you all. There's a lot of very sensible stuff that one can do as an individual to protect oneself from the cyber risks. As a company, as an individual, as a country, I think one has to assume that if the worst can happen, at some point it probably will. But I think there's one systemic thing that we could do as a country to try to shore up our society so that we minimise this kind of risk. And it's very simple. I would not be worried about enforcing everyone in public schools to learn Asian languages. Who knows, in 10 years there'll probably be an act for that. I think we could reduce the amount of time that is invested in school syllabi discussing environmental issues. But we could make the teaching of computer science, and by that I don't mean learning how to open a Word page or teaching people how to make a movie on an iPad. I mean teaching people how to program in a serious way. We could make that a compulsory subject, along with maths and English and science, for every student in our society.